SFB Addict here with another game playback. This one we have two Gorn tournament command cruisers versus a Paravian tournament command cruiser and a Romulan KR tournament cruiser. So let's just take a quick look at the weapons here. The Romulan has two S-torps and two F-torps, left portion and right portion. 3 phaser 1s in the nose, which are FX, phaser 1 in each wing, and then 6 phaser 3s, 4 of which are rear firing. Now this is actually the 2005 SSD. Unfortunately, when we started the game, the copy that I had was, I think, from 2001, and it didn't have the phaser 3s, so that caused a moment of confusion later during the game. And we also had a similar thing going on with the Paravian, where I was using a 2009 copy and my opponent was using a more recent one. So in both cases I had an older copy of the SSDs. And here we have the Paravian with 4 quantum torpedoes. These are sort of like a plasma drone. They don't degrade with distance as much as a regular plasma does, but they have a limited range, and you can overload them, but they have a range of 14 when you do that, and they can fire every turn. And when they hit, they sort of hit like a PPD. So that's the Paravian. 6 phaser 1s and 6 phaser 3s in addition to the 4 heavy weapons. And of course the Gorn has 2 S-torps and 2 F-torps and 8 phaser 1s and 2 phaser 3s. It has 30 warp, 5 battery, and 4 APR and 4 impulse. I forgot to start the log file on this one. So what happened here is the Gorn started over here where this T marker is, and the Romulan started a little bit farther back as well, right on top of these turn markers. And the Gorn came in speed 26 with 5 defensive electronics and 1 cutting, and the Romulans came in speed 6, 0 and 0 on the Romulan, and the Romulan is cloaked. And the Paravian is speed 6 with 3 and 3 electronics. So the counter here that's a Klingon is the Romulan KR, and the one here that's looks like a Sparrowhawk, or the Dideridex from the top, if you will, is representing the Paravian. And the 2 Gorn ships over here on this side are both in the same hex. So I'm using an SVG image, which is sharper, for one ship, and a PNG one for the other ship. And they're both in the same hex. Okay, so right off the bat, the Romulan Paravian player has made 2 tactical mistakes. One is that they are coming in at speed 6 in a fleet action. Slow speeds are generally not a good idea. Not unless you're going to be mid-turning down to Wild Weasel speed kind of thing. And weaseling against plasma players is a good strategy, but by going so slow you give up the tactical advantage. And here, the second mistake is the Romulan is cloaked, leaving the Paravian by itself, making half of the fleet's weapons inaccessible for the battle. Okay, so like I said, we're starting on Impulse 9 because I forgot to start the log file for the first 8 impulses. I'll try not to do that again in the future. But anyway, most of this is just the Gorn speeding along, coming in as quickly as possible. Now right here, the Paravian doesn't want to launch anything because the Gorn could slip behind the planet, have the quantum torpedoes lock onto the planet, and not damage the Gorn, so he's holding fire. So we're zipping along here on the impulses. Now, right here is where the Paravian should have launched the quantum torpedoes, because if the Gorn turns down, he's going to hit a moon. And the planet is further blocking turning down. So the Gorn can either turn right and go up, or can continue to close. So right now is the perfect time for the quantum torps to have been launched from the Paravian, but that didn't happen. And the Romulan was decloaking here for a few of those impulses from about impulse 20 or 19 thereabouts. It's now decloaked. The Romulan kind of caught on to the fact that half of his weapons were inaccessible and thought better of staying cloaked. Romulan is completely out of cloak. Impulse 30. The Romulan is firing on impulse 30. Gorn is not firing. Here the Paravian Romulan player is checking his arcs for his phasers. And now I'm using this turn marker to designate the limitation of the left portion arcs, showing that the Gorn is not in left portion. And then I bring out the diagram, and he looks at the diagram to confirm that left portion is indeed no longer arcing on the Gorn. The Romulan launches one S torpedo and one F torpedo on impulse 30, and since we're using tournament cruisers, there are no fake F torpedoes, no pseudo Fs on tournament cruisers. So I'm just reminding him of that as he's writing down the real fake orders. And the Romulan side fires 4 phaser 1s and 1 phaser 3 at the Gorn at range 6. And of course the phaser 3 misses, and the phaser 1s do some damage at range 6. They do 5 points. And then we get some movement on impulse 31. And then the Paravian launches quantum torpedoes, 4 of them. And that's going to be represented by the black plasma counter, which he is just putting onto the map over here and about to put on top of his ships. Now the range is 5 between the fleets. So at this point, the Gorn, looking at a speed 6 opponent on impulse 31, knows that launching plasma here would be a bad idea because he can just simply come in at speed 4 and Wild Weasel anything he launches. Of course, the Romulan player didn't even think about launching so close to the end of the turn and the Gorn doing something similar. But anyway, now we have fire coming from both ships. The Gorn changes electronics, drops 2 ECCM. Drops 2 ECM down from 5 down to 3. It increases his cutting from 1 to 3 cutting. And he's bolting 2S and 2Fs. So that's 100 points of plasma bolted, and it will do 50 points if it hits. If it all hits. And he's firing 10 phaser 1s. and he made a mistake on the weapon mount here. That's not an 8, that would be a phaser 3. It is actually number 10. And the Romulan side is firing back with 4 phaser 1s. It's my name on it because he was having trouble with his keyboard with the Control C, so I copied and pasted it into chat for him. And there's his roll. Pretty good rolls. 50% of it is under 4. And does 16 points to the number 2 shield of the Gorn, in addition to the 5 that they had done previously. So at this point, that's the number 2 shield on one of the 2 Gorns. And Gorn just realized it was number 10, not 8. And that's the order that he's rolling his bolts in. And drum roll, please. 3 of them miss. And he hits with 1F at range 5 for 10 points. And then the 10 phaser 1s fire. 7 of them, of the 10, are 4 and above. So, pretty bad rolls for the phasers. But it's range 5, so luckily everything hits at this range. And there's the damage from the phasers for a total of 41. And the Paravian drains 5 batteries, and that does 6 internals to the Paravian. And we ended up getting a phaser hit here on the 4, and a quantum torpedo hit on the 11. A bridge hit as well. And then we had some hull hits. And then it's impulse 32. Gorn turns down. And the Romulans turn up to chase. So on this impulse, the Gorn is going to open the fire window and fire his 2, or number 9 phaser mounts, 1 from each ship for 2 phaser 1s in total. And the Paravian Romulan are going to continue firing. So the Romulan side fires 2 phaser 1s and 2 phaser 3s. Gorn does some pretty good damage. And this 1 and a 2 is the phaser 3s. Believe it or not, he hit with both his phaser 3s, but rolled pretty badly with his phaser 1s. So the Gorn took 9. So a 1 and a 5, and this is range 4 is what the Gorn rolled. Sorry, that was 7 and 2. That's not 7 and 12, it's 7 and 2 for 9. And the 1 and the 5 from the Gorn did 8 points of damage in return. So at this point, that is the shielding on the Gorn. And on the Paravian, the number 1 shield is a little bit damaged. And of course the number 2 shield is down, and there's a few internals. I'm not showing you the rest of the SSD at this point because it's more damage later on. I'm not showing you yet. And here the Gorn reveals what his mid-turn speed changes was for the turn. And at this point we lost vocalization on Discord. The Gorn was clarifying which torpedoes were the quantums and which ones were plasmas. And here the Gorn is preparing 4 shuttles for this upcoming turn. And that was the end of the turn. Okay, turn 2. Gorn is coming in speed 31. On his first turn, his original plot was going to be a speed 26 down to 13. But then later thought better of it and instead went from 26 down to 16. So that's why he's able to go 31 this turn. Luckily he didn't do the 13 because that would have limited him to speed 26 and the plasmas would have caught him. Okay, so the Romulan side is coming in, speed 16, 3 and 3, and the Gorn has got 0 and 0 for electronics. And the Paravian has 0 and 0 for electronics. And the Gorn now launches 4 shuttles. 2 from each ship. The Gorn has 2 shuttle bays. Now what's going to happen here in a moment is the Romulans and Paravians don't want this shuttle fleet to get off of the down shield, so they're going to start shooting at it. And they're also in fear that they may be suicide shuttles. No actions. No actions. Fire window. And the Romulan starts firing. Open fire window. So they kill 1 shuttle. It goes down to 3. And they fire some more stuff. At this point, we realize the discrepancy in the SSDs that we're using. So we start sharing screen shares and showing each other what SSDs we have and figuring out where the discrepancy is. And then the Romulan kills 2 more shuttles and cripples a 3rd. And because they were so intent on shooting at the shuttles, they lost track of the fact that the Gorn is now off the down shield on the Paravian. So at this point, the Gorn could, and some would argue should, launch the 2 plasma Fs and should fire the 4 phaser 1s that bear, 2 on each ship. But the Gorn's not launching the Fs at this point because he's planning on next turn coming in with another high-speed bolt run and wants to have the 100 points of plasma for 50 possible direct fire. And here it is impulse 2, and his rear back bubble phaser 1s are not up yet. So he's only got his left side phaser 1s. So he could fire now, or he could try and wait and see if the Romulan Paravian is still so preoccupied with the shuttles they continue to forget about the down shield. So the Gorn is holding his fire. You'll see the Paravian player rotate his plasmas like that a few times. That's because he's on a laptop and doesn't have the number pad for doing the movement. So he just picks one Control L or Control R and just rotates it to change facing. And the final 4 shuttle is dead. But it's now Impulse 8. The 2 back bubble phasers on the Gorn that fired on Impulse 32 are now available. So instead of having 4 phaser 1s, he now has 8 phaser 1s, which are available to fire at the Paravian's down shield. And that's what the Gorn is now doing. And half of them, again, are 4 and above. So 50-50 on the dice rolls here. But it's 17 damage through a down shield. And we have a phaser hit on the 4, a phaser hit on the 10, a torpedo hit on the 11, another phaser hit, and another phaser hit. That tractor beam gone was an accidental click on the tractor beam. And at this point we had the Paravian player had to reboot his computer, and when he came back he had to finish applying damage. So at this point, this is the damage to the Paravian. He's lost 2 quantum torps. He didn't have the cargo to begin with, but he had 14 hull, and he's now down to just the last 2. He's lost a phaser 1 and 3 phaser 3s. And here the Gorn finally kind of clues in and decides to launch a couple plasma Fs, changing his plan. Realizing that at speed 16, the Romulan shouldn't be weaseling, but he should have launched them much sooner from back here rather than 3 impulses later up here. So there we go. The Gorn has launched 2 F-torps. And the Romulans, Paravians decide to run away. And it's an interesting choice because their down shield is facing in this direction. No actions. At this point, the quantum torpedoes drop because they've gone 14, and one of the plasmas is about to drop because it's gone 15, the F-torp. So it's now just the S-torp that's still on the board. Thinking back on it, the Paravian probably would have done better not to overload the torpedoes because they get longer range. Or, since they were overloaded, he should have launched them at that earlier point when the Gorn was right next to the moon. And we had a mid-turn speed change here on the Romulan, down to speed 6. And he's identifying which ships the torpedoes are targeted on. So he now knows which plasma's target on which ship, and there's one on each ship. And here, the Romulan Paravian player made a mistake, thinking they could Wild Weasel at speed 6, when it's actually speed 4 or under. At this point I told him that the Weasels wouldn't work and he can keep them on board, but he decided to continue with the actual penalties of having launched the Weasels, which means his active fire control would be down and the shuttles are on the board. So he's starting at this point to raise his active fire control back up. And he then decides to fire at double the range at the plasmas. And originally I was going to let him tractor his shuttles back in, but then we realized that the Weasels would have taken down his active fire control. But I told him, don't worry about it, you're going so slow, and after the next number of impulses go back up, you're going to pull them back in anyway, so just get rid of them now. That way you can see your ships. And that's what he did. And then he completely vaporizes one F torpedo. And does some damage to the other. But it's still got enough on it to do a fair amount of damage. And ended up taking some damage to his number 3 shield. And here we penciled in the extra phaser 3s that he has. And the Romulan only has 3 ECM, and the plasmas, of course, have their own 3 cutting, so there's no shift. And here we just decide to do about 4 impulses in a row, kind of thing, since the only thing moving is me and the plasma's chasing me. And then at this impulse, the plasma's hit. 5 points to the shield, and I reinforce it by 4 battery. So it does 1 damage, and it's 1 damage on the other ship that has not been damaged. So 1 point to the number 5. And then we just go to movement to the end of the turn. And that's where we end up at the end of the turn. Now, the Romulan was going speed 6 at the end of the turn. That means his maximum speed is going to be 16 the entire turn coming. And the Gorn can, of course, go top speed. And he's got 1 S-torpedo on each ship available. And he can put some power into phasers, kind of thing. And, nope, didn't want the sector map. I want the range of line of sight range. So we are 23 apart. So that'll be 23 plus the Romulan's speed 16 minus, let's say, 31 for the Gorn, which means by the end of this turn 3, they will be within range 8. So by the end of the turn, the Gorn would be within phasering and bolting range again. But at the very next first impulse of the turn, the Romulan Paravian would be able to disengage. So we called it at this point. Yes, the Gorn probably could have come up and pounded on this weak shield of the Romulan, or punch through a good rear shield of the Paravian to do more damage, but neither one would be a kill, basically. So we decided to forego the third turn and just, at this point, disengage. So that was the 2 Gorn versus 1 Rom and 1 Paravian battle. Hope you enjoyed it.